Come on. Vectors, vectors, vectors. Tiles, tiles, tiles. Here we go. There's more warmth down here. We are here for using OSM vector tiles. Here's Paul. I'm going to hand over to him.
Thank you. I'm Paul Norman, and I'm here to talk to you about the OSMF's new vector tiles. I've been working for the OSMF as a part-time contractor, as well as I do many other things in OpenStreetMap. I've been around and an OpenStreetMap developer since 2010 or so. But this is all about tiles, vector tiles. But before we get to vector tiles, I want to talk about the standard tile layer. I'm sure everyone here has seen it. It uses OpenStreetMap Carto as its style. It's been doing that for over a decade, and it's what we're used to. But there are some problems with it that are just inherent to the technology. You can't overlay data on top, so this is not much of an issue for OSM, where we're not overlaying data that much, though we do it with the data view, change sets, object view. In general, you want to put your labels on top of your lines. You can't do that with raster tiles without a lot of tricks. There's other stuff that you want on modern devices, like phones, which are over 50% of visits these days. So retina tiles for high DPIs, fractional zooms, rotation, dark mode. Dark mode sort of works, but the others don't work. So if you're wondering why the map looks blurry on your mobile device or your high DPI screen, that's why. It's also difficult operationally. If someone wants to start with it and then migrate to self-hosting, there's not really a great path. The full stack is complicated to set up if you want to run it reliably. It's okay if you are just doing it as a side project and don't need redundancy or anything like that. But running it as a reliable service has a pretty high operational load for someone who is not used to it. The architecture is also a problem operationally, because someone scraping tiles can cause a lot of undue load. We do our best to fight that, but it would be nice to not have to fight it as much. And then lastly, the software stack is complicated. There are parts with really no developers and that are complicated. If it were just one or the other, it would be not so bad, but we could manage complicated with a developer or not complicated and have ops people do the occasional change needed. But both of them combined is a real problem so when we run into issues. So what's the solution to some of these problems? Vector tiles. What are vector tiles? They're not raster. They're fundamentally different. A raster tile is image, PNG, JPEG, something like that, with a bunch of pixels with colors. Vector tiles are instead filled with points, lines, and areas. They don't have any color information, any styling, anything like that. They're turned to an image client side with a style that is done on the client. This allows for more rendering flexibility. So because it's on the client knows that it needs to render it at a particular DPI, or that needs to switch some of the colors for dark mode. All of these things that raster tiles can't do, it allows vector tiles to do. So the tiles have points, lines, and areas in various layers, and what those layers are and what goes into them and how it's all labeled in them is defined by a schema. We're using shortbread. We had a shortbread meeting yesterday evening, and shortbread is a lightweight schema, so it doesn't include absolutely everything. Everything is a great deal of everything when it comes to OpenStreetMap. but it works for our purposes. It's not necessarily, there's still more work going on, of course. So let's say you want to use the tiles. How do you get them? How do you use them? So there's two key URLs, and they're both in the usage policy. Depending on what your software is, you will need to give it one of these two URLs. I'll go into an example of the common stuff, but if you've got something uncommon, one or the other should work. If you're going to use the tiles, you're probably going to use MapLibre. To use MapLibre, you need a MapLibre style written for shortbread tiles. I could go through exactly how to build one, but Switch to OSM has a well-written guide on how to use Versatile's colorful and existing style to build it, stick it on your own server, and get a map like this. Go read the guide. It's got all of the steps in detail that are essential to follow, but boring for a presentation. So this will get you a map that looks like this. Now, that's nice, but we can do more. Including having a corrupt slide. No, it's missing a slide. Which I will Yeah, I just need to get to the... no, I just needed the notes. Normally, with a map, you want to highlight some data. So I'm going to use the example of dry stone walls, as you can see with this picture. Now, the vector tiles don't contain detailed information on walls. They don't have walls at all, but they don't have the detailed information you might care about, like what is the wall made of and stuff like that. So we need to bring our own vector tiles. But we only need walls in our tiles because the OSMF service has everything else that we need. Yes. I'm trying to manage two in case one of them is missing all of my notes. So we're going to use software called TileMaker, which, as the name says, makes tiles. You can use it to generate your own shortbread tiles. So just like the tiles we've got, you can generate a complete tile set of shortbread tiles. But we're just going to use wall data because that's all we need. To run TileMaker, you give it a config, and I'm going to go through the next slides quickly because reading configs on screen is boring, and you can check the presentation later, or I will also be publishing this. So you just tell it there's one layer, so fairly simple config, and then you have logic that looks for barrier retaining wall, barrier wall, and looks at what the material is. So dry stone, brick, stone, concrete, or wood. We then run it and generate what's called a PM tiles file. A PM tiles file is a container that has a bunch of tiles inside it. This is because tiles are small and there's millions of them. If we generate PM tiles, we can copy them. We don't have to worry about causing file system problems and all the sorted problems when you have 360 million tiny files. We can then put it on basically any web server. You could put it on an object store like S3. You could put it on a machine somewhere with Apache. In this case, I'm serving it locally because it's a demo, but that's all the hosting you need to do. This is about if you can host a web page, which you need to do to put the map up anyways, you should be able to do this. And we're going to use Maputnik, a visual style editor, and load up the style. So this is what Maputnik looks like. I've loaded up the Versatile's colorful style we made earlier based on the switch to OSM instructions. And all I need to do is add a new source. This source is called walls. PM Tiles requires a plugin, but Maputnik already uses that. So then, I'm not going to go into MapLibre GL styling in detail. That is its own full-day lecture. This is 4 layers, and the colors of the sides indicate the material. So you've got brick and dry stone walls there. So we haven't actually done anything here that is not possible with raster tiles yet. It would be a lot more difficult with raster tiles, but it's possible. But if you look at the names here, you can't really read them because they're right next to a wall. This next step, which is a bit harder to see, changes that completely. The labels are on top of the lines. This is how it should be. This is something that you can't do with raster tiles. And all that you have to do with vector tiles is just rearrange it. And then export the style, and then you can use it with your own web page. Okay. Now, this then you've got the style. You can put it on your own web page. You probably want. You then have to worry about what kind of story are you telling, what kind of cartography you're going to do. Vector tiles gets you to the point where you aren't worrying about what tools am I using to get this hosted online and viewable. It gets you to the more creative stuff, the stuff that is more difficult now in many ways. But it's not just MapLibre that can use the tiles. QGIS can. So QGIS is popular open source GIS software. It has native support for vector tiles. You can have it use the tiles like this, which I do regularly for debugging. It's a good tool for figuring out the exact details of what is in a tile when I'm working on developing it. But it can even read MapLibre tiles, and just like before, you could have a map that looks the same. So you can have a map in QGIS using vector tiles that looks like the shortbread style on osm.org. So what can you do next? You could make your own shortbread tiles with TileMaker. There's a good example in the documentation of that. But because shortbread is a standard used by multiple people, you could also download pre-made tiles from GeoFabric. So if you decide that you like the OSMF vector tile service, but you need something that you're hosting yourself, maybe because you want to have an SLA, which as a free service we don't offer, or maybe you're behind a very restrictive firewall or an air-gapped network. You can download PM tile, or you can download an archive of all the tiles for a country, or a region, I suppose, from GeoFabric. So you could download all of the tiles for Scotland, and then you could run a fairly simple server and serve those locally. You don't actually have to generate them unless you're after the entire world. So those are just some of the things that you could go on to do next. But also, what's next for the OSMF vector tiles? The big thing is Shortbread 1.1, which we're working on. Probably the most notable feature in there is better multilingual support. So you'll be able to have a map, and you'll be able to switch it between English, French, Chinese, and see labels subject to OSM data in the language you prefer. There's other fixes, but we're also looking at route relations, more of an issue in the US and parts of Europe than in the UK, and access restrictions, so roads that you aren't allowed to drive on and stuff like that. And also more styles. We're hoping to see more styles. Now, what could you do if you want to help with this and get involved? You could fix PowerPoint's import. No, it's just cut off the URL. So the single best way to help would be to write and publish styles using shortbread. Go out, use the tiles, do interesting things with them. Show us what is possible. If you do a nice style, we could even look at having it as a featured layer on osm.org, and it'll work with any shortbread tiles. So the OSMF, ones from GeoFabric, Versatiles also offers them. You could get involved with the shortbread specification. I've put what's probably going to land in 1.1, but we need to work out what's going to be happening beyond that. You could also, if you're more technically inclined, you could help with the implementation that creates the tiles, or with the software that serves the tiles. Both of these are on GitHub. The bottom link is cut off. It's called Tile Kiln. The first one is written in Lua and SQL. The second one is written in Python. I'm the main developer on both of those, and I would always welcome help. There is also another talk at, I believe, 2:30 that is a technical deep dive into exactly how these are served. It's not going to go into how to use them. It's going to go into how do you manage to get them to be updated minutely for the entire planet. That's something I don't think I mentioned. These are, like the standard layer, these are updated every minute. You probably don't need that for most maps, but it's important for OpenStreetMap.org to have live feedback. And I guess now I'll open it up to questions.
We are recording the talk, so I need to use the mic. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah? Speak into it,
So, as a consumer of vector tiles already, so I'm using Planetiler and OpenMap tiles, which was the default when I tried it, and so ended up using that. Is there a good reason to move to using shortbread? Obviously, the schema is different, and is there data that ends up in the schema that would be better for reasons?
There's different data that ends up in the schema. OpenMap Tiles has had more time to develop it.
Thanks.
Has had more time to develop its schema. There's also different availability of the tiles. It depends on exactly what you're after. If you develop something for OpenMap Tiles, if you're busy, it is probably not the top priority to switch. But if you had something where you wanted minutely updates, no one offers those with OpenMap Tiles right now.
Come on, there's a room of people. You must have a question. You've got a question, excellent.
So how are the file sizes between the raster tiles and the vector tiles, and how much data is there in the vector tiles that's included in the schema that's not actually used in the default rendering?
So before talking about file sizes, need to talk about scale. So zoom does not, if you look at a map, we normally think of it in terms of zoom. That's actually not scale, because scale also depends on the pixel size on screen. Vector tiles normally cover four times the screen area of raster tiles. So the tiles are bigger, but the overall data can be less. It's also significantly different when you're handling zooms 14 plus, because of what's called overzoom, where the tiles stop at 14, but because they're vectors, you can keep zooming in. So if you're panning around on zoom 19, it's going to be way smaller with vector tiles. The sizes are comparable. The outliers with vector tiles are bigger, but the average size is about the same. There is also very little data that's in the tile that is not being shown by the style right now. As we add more things to the shortbread schema, that may change, but we are very aware of tile size.
Yeah, I mean, with raster tiles, it was not so well accepted that third parties use this. Is it okay in the past to use the OSMF tiles for experimenting with styles self-constructed?
Yeah. In fact, for technical reasons, it's a lot easier to handle unexpected load with the vector tiles because most of the work is already done, whereas we've experienced what can happen with raster tiles. We don't have as much infrastructure behind the vector tiles, so if you're releasing onto the front page of Google, please contact us first. But for anything that people are likely to be doing, particularly experimenting, you can just go ahead and use the tiles.
It's a loaded question, but you mentioned that there are some people that export their vector tiles. So GeoFabric have a download of the vector tiles that they have.
Yeah.
Do you think the foundation should offer an export of all the vector tiles?
It is something I would like to add to Tile Kiln. There are a couple of issues. On the technical side, this tool chain is optimized for serving minutely. This means that something like Planet Tiler or TileMaker can generate the entire planet's worth of tiles in, say, 2 hours. Tile Kiln takes much longer. On the other hand, those tools can also generate one tile in 2 hours. So they're optimized for a different use case. We don't have every single tile rendered because no one is viewing the ocean in Zoom 14. So we probably won't offer it for technical reasons. Also, if you're after a country, GeoFabric has it. If you're after the entire planet, it's very, compared to the raster toolchain, it's very easy to set up. You can just even run it in a Docker container.
It's not a question, just an addition to your talk. There's also another download option for shortbread vector tiles now. It's at extract.bbike.org where you can get a MB tiles file of any region you want.
Yes, I saw the pull request to the shortbread website, but I haven't had time to check it out yet. So yeah, there's another source. If you're, do you know if they can do the entire planet? But if you're doing that, you might as well download the planet file yourself and run it, since it takes just a couple of hours, which, given we're talking about over 100 gigs of stuff, is not
And
bad.
if you do want to learn how to do that, I believe there's a workshop on Planet Tile later today showing you how to do exactly that.
Was it later or earlier?
I thought it was later on.
Okay, later.
Fantastic.
In the medium term, assume that OSM switches off raster tiles and it's all vector. What's the impact to the architecture and the complexity of the whole operation?
So our secondary services that use the data are all quite self-contained. So if we switched off one of them, it would have no overall impact except getting rid of that particular service. Switching off raster is not something we're planning on doing at this point. It's not something we've even discussed. If we were to do it, we would probably need to be doing vector to raster server side for clients like JAWSM, which is obviously an important client for us. and they just, I don't think they have a reasonable way to work with with vector tiles within Java.
Although I guess you could implement like a JavaScript engine inside JOSM and
Yeah,
push the problem to
yeah,
JOSM.
yes, but it's not something we're planning. If we did turn it off today, well, the obvious thing is a lot of things would break because they're still using it. We would probably reallocate the servers to other purposes, but it would also it would make everything easier just because we then wouldn't have to worry about the raster tile service, which gets complicated for scraping.
Yeah, it was a leading question.
Yeah. But we don't have any plans. We have not discussed any kind of timeline or anything for that.
I think we've got time for one more question. Not a lot. No. Ah, here we go. Okay.
And I just checked, and it's at 1:30 for the make your own base map with MapLibre and Planetiler, and 2:30 for the Minutely Vector Tiles deep dive.
I think the raster tiles on OSM look really nice, just aesthetically. And one thing I found is that in many instances, vector tiles, like I've seen other organizations like Ordnance Survey, for example, release vector tiles, and their vector tiles just had a hard time looking as nice as the raster, especially when you have so many different vector libraries for like rendering it client side. Do you think we're at the point where shortbread ones look as nice as the raster ones?
So vector tiles don't have a look to them. It's the styles that do. You can write the MapLibre GL styling language is difficult to write. It does some things worse than Mapnik, which is the most popular raster things. It does some things better. It's difficult to compare them directly because if you look at something like OpenStreetMap Carto, it is optimized for what Mapnik can do. It is not optimized for the things it can't do because it's written to use Mapnik. You can certainly have information-dense styles, and I mean, most maps out there at this point are vector, so you can cover a whole range. There are some things that that are still difficult to do, but there is also another layer to this, and that is when you have a raster map, you're just really considering it as a static map. You're viewing it on the screen and maybe panning around or zooming. There's no interactivity. So your cartography is really basically the same as a printed map. With vector tiles, you can start to build in interaction. So you aren't trying to load as much data into the screen, into what's displayed on screen, if you're then also interacting with it. Shortbread is not there yet. I would say I don't think any of the open tile schemas have the kind of detail that OpenStreetMap Carto does.
Yeah, I guess you've got like years of refinement to sort of like catch up on, which is why you want people to get involved and write and publish more styles.
OpenStreetMap Carto's cartography is derived from the old map, what was called the Mapnik style, which was written in 2007.
Vintage.
Yeah, I'm a former maintainer of OpenStreetMap Carto. You can trace some of the cartography back to then. It has had over a decade of work on it. It has also, frankly, written itself into a corner that makes it very difficult for it to change anything with it because of its complexity.